In 1983, during the height of the Cold War, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high. Both superpowers had thousands of nuclear weapons ready to launch at a moment's notice. One wrong move could mean global destruction. On September 26, 1983, a Soviet early warning system detected multiple US nuclear missiles heading toward Russia. The protocol was clear: report the attack immediately so the USSR could launch a retaliatory strike before it was too late. But something was wrong. Instead of following orders, one man made a split-second decision that went against his training, against his orders, and against logic. But in doing so, he prevented a nuclear war that could have wiped out millions of lives. This is the untold story of how a single mistake, choosing not to act, saved the world. To understand why this moment was so dangerous, we need to go back to the Cold War, a time when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle for global dominance. It wasn't a traditional war with soldiers fighting on battlefields, it was a war of ideologies, weapons, and the constant fear of nuclear annihilation. By 1983, tensions were at their highest. Just a few weeks before the incident, the US had launched Able Archer 83, a military exercise that simulated a full-scale nuclear war against the USSR. The Soviets mistakenly believed it was real, putting their nuclear forces on high alert. In this climate of paranoia and mistrust, both sides had nuclear missiles ready to launch at a moment's notice. A false alarm, a misunderstanding, or even a minor mistake could end the world in minutes. And then, on the night of September 26, 1983, inside a high-security Soviet bunker, alarms suddenly blared. A nightmare scenario was unfolding. On September 26, 1983, deep inside the Sierpa-15 bunker near Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty, monitoring the Soviet Union's early warning system. This system, designed to detect incoming US nuclear missiles, was the first line of defense against an attack. Suddenly, alarms blared. The screen flashed a terrifying message: missile launch detected. An intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, from the United States was heading straight for the Soviet Union. Seconds later, the system reported 4 more missiles. According to Soviet protocol, this meant one thing: the US had just launched a nuclear first strike. The USSR had only minutes to respond before impact. The logical response: launch a full-scale nuclear counterattack. Petrov's superiors were expecting an immediate report. If he confirmed the attack, the Soviet Union would retaliate within minutes, launching hundreds of nuclear missiles toward the United States and its allies. The world stood on the edge of nuclear war, and Petrov was the only man who could stop it. Stanislav Petrov was trained to follow strict military protocol. If the system detected a US nuclear attack, his duty was to immediately report it to his superiors. The Soviet High Command would then order a full-scale counterstrike, launching hundreds of nuclear missiles at the United States, Europe, and NATO allies. But something didn't feel right. Petrov knew that if the US wanted to start a nuclear war, they wouldn't send just 5 missiles, they would launch hundreds in a massive first strike. But the system was showing only a handful of incoming warheads. His mind raced. Was this real? Or was it a false alarm? The clock was ticking, he had just minutes to decide. If he ignored the warning and it was a real attack, millions in the Soviet Union could die. But if he reported it and it was false, his actions could lead to global destruction. He took a deep breath and made the most important decision of his life. He chose to do nothing. Petrov did not report the missile attack to his superiors. He broke protocol, betting everything on his gut feeling that the warning was a false alarm. Now, He could only wait. Would he be remembered as a traitor or the man who saved the world? After what felt like an eternity, Petrov kept staring at the radar screens, waiting for any sign of a real nuclear explosion. But nothing happened. No missiles struck Soviet territory. No US attack ever came. Slowly, the terrifying reality set in. It was a false alarm. The Soviet early warning system had malfunctioned. A rare software glitch had mistakenly interpreted sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as incoming missile launches. Petrov's instincts had been right. If he had blindly followed protocol and reported the attack, the Soviet Union would have retaliated, triggering an all-out nuclear war between the USSR and the United States. Instead, thanks to one man's decision to think before acting, the world had just narrowly escaped annihilation. But instead of being celebrated as a hero, Petrov's troubles were just beginning. You'd think that saving the world would make Petrov a national hero, right? But in the Soviet Union, things didn't work that way. Petrov had disobeyed protocol and exposed a critical flaw in the USSR's missile warning system. Instead of being rewarded, his actions were covered up by the Soviet government. His superiors conducted an investigation, not to praise him, but to find faults in his decision-making. The military was embarrassed that their advanced system had nearly caused a global catastrophe. As punishment, Petrov was demoted and received a formal reprimand. His once promising military career was over. He retired early, suffered from stress-related illnesses, and spent years living in obscurity in a small Russian apartment. For decades, no one knew his story. The world had no idea how close it had come to nuclear war, all because of a split-second decision by one man. It wasn't until years later that the truth finally came out. For over a decade, Stanislav Petrov's heroic act remained a state secret. The Soviet government never acknowledged how close the world had come to nuclear war. It wasn't until 1998, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that retired General Yuri Votintsev, Petrov's former commander, revealed the classified incident in a series of interviews. The truth spread, shocking the world. One man's decision had saved millions of lives. Western nations hailed Petrov as a hero. In 2004, he was honored at the United Nations, and in 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize for preventing a global catastrophe. Yet, despite the recognition, Petrov remained humble and indifferent to fame. When asked how he felt about saving the world, he simply said, "I was just doing my job." But his actions weren't just a job, they were a testament to the power of human judgment over blind obedience. Let's imagine for a moment, what if Stanislav Petrov had followed orders? If he had reported the detected missiles as a real US attack, the Soviet leadership would have had only minutes to decide their next move. Given the extreme Cold War tensions in 1983, the likely response would have been an immediate full-scale nuclear counterattack. That means, hundreds of Soviet nuclear missiles would have been launched at US cities, military bases, and NATO allies. The United States would have detected the launches and retaliated, unleashing their own nuclear arsenal. Within hours, cities like Moscow, New York, Washington, and London would have been reduced to radioactive wastelands. Millions would have died instantly, and billions more from nuclear fallout, radiation poisoning, and global starvation due to a nuclear winter. In short, civilization as we know it could have ended that night. And all of it would have been triggered by a computer error. Petrov's decision to pause, analyze, and trust his instincts instead of blindly following orders, saved the world from destruction. But his story raises a terrifying question: could a similar false alarm happen again? Stanislav Petrov's story is a chilling reminder of how close we came to global nuclear war, and the frightening truth is, it could happen again. Even today, the United States, Russia, China, and other nuclear powers rely on early warning systems to detect missile launches. But these systems, just like in 1983, are not perfect. There have been several false alarms since Petrov's incident. 1995, Russia's radar mistook a Norwegian research rocket for a US nuclear missile. The Russian president was alerted, and the world was minutes away from war before the mistake was realized. 2010, China's missile warning system malfunctioned, falsely detecting an attack. Luckily, it was caught in time. 2018, Hawaiians received a terrifying emergency alert: ballistic missile threat inbound. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. It turned out to be a false alarm due to human error. With today's AI-driven defense systems, cyber threats, and rising tensions, the risk of accidental nuclear war is still very real. The world still relies on humans, like Petrov, to make life or death decisions in seconds. But what if, next time, there's no one like him to stop it? Stanislav Petrov never fired a weapon, never fought in a war, yet he may have saved more lives than anyone in history. His story is a powerful lesson about the dangers of blindly trusting technology and the importance of human judgment. A simple computer glitch nearly caused global destruction, but one man's ability to think critically and stay calm under pressure prevented a catastrophe. Was Petrov a hero, or just a man who did his job? And if you want more mind-blowing stories from history and science, subscribe and be part of our journey. Despite his actions, Petrov never saw himself as a hero. He lived his later years in obscurity, in a small apartment in Russia, surviving on a military pension. He passed away in 2017, largely unknown to the world he had saved. His legacy serves as a warning: nuclear war can start not by aggression, but by accident. Even today, the world remains on edge, with thousands of nuclear weapons still on high alert. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Petrov's story is this: in moments of crisis, one person's courage, wisdom, and refusal to act in fear can change the course of history. So, what do you think? Was Petrov a hero, or just a man who did his job? Let us know in the comments.